In 1819, the British Admiralty commissioned an expedition with one clear goal: find the Northwest Passage, a sea route through or around the continent of North America that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The man in charge was Sir John Franklin, a veteran of many Arctic expeditions. In his previous voyages, he'd proven himself capable and trustworthy, so no one expected the disaster that was about to befall him. The expedition of John Franklin began with high hopes: a well-equipped crew and 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These were not your average vessels. They were purpose-built for this journey. Both ships were 70 meters long and had been reinforced with extra timbers along their hulls to resist the pressure of ice. And both were fitted with powerful cannons to break through any ice that got in their way. Moreover, the ships carried enough supplies to last for 5 years and featured state-of-the-art technology, including improved versions of earlier invented devices like the Kelvin and Mackenzie diving bells, which were designed to allow divers to work underwater for longer periods. Additionally, there were plenty of backup provisions stored on board in case something happened to the main supplies. And then there were the men. A total of 129 sailors and officers signed on for the journey aboard the 2 ships. This included experienced Arctic crewmen who knew what to expect in these cold waters. One of them, a surgeon named Thomas, later recalled seeing the look on the fresh recruits' faces when they first saw the vast expanse of frozen ocean around them. Their jaunty looks and confident air gave place to astonishment and doubt, he wrote. Despite their different levels of experience, all aboard were well-trained and competent. On June, the 2 ships set sail from England and made their way to the Arctic coast of Canada. For the next 2 years, the ships sailed through icy waters and searched for a path through the Arctic ice. During the voyage, the crew spotted some amazing things, such as strange lights dancing across the night sky and vast herds of marine animals. But these wonders couldn't lift the gloom that had fallen over the crew. It was clear that finding a passage through the Arctic would be much harder than everyone had anticipated. But just as winter approached and morale began to decline, Franklin made an exciting discovery. He found evidence that a warmer sea route existed somewhere north of the area he was currently in. So the ships turned north toward Beechey Island in search of a navigable passage. As they reached their destination, the 2 ships became trapped by thick ice and were forced to spend the winter here. The conditions were terrible. The men huddled around small fires, trying to keep warm in the cramped quarters below deck. Storms raged outside, making the constant cracking and groaning of the ice even more terrifying. Food was also in short supply. And as spring dragged on without any sign of rescue, despair began to set in among the men. Then, on April 22, 1848, Franklin died. He suffered from a painful and mysterious illness for several months before succumbing. His crew performed a quick burial ceremony and laid him to rest beneath a cairn of stones on the ice. Then they set about the task of keeping the ships afloat and alive as they waited for rescue that never came. Desperate times called for desperate measures. The men started hunting for food, but the ice offered little sustenance. So they turned to the ship's stores. By eating only part of each ration, they hoped to stretch out their supplies as much as possible. But it wasn't enough. By the end of July, they were down to their last few mouthfuls of food. It was then that Captain Crozier decided to abandon ship. He and the other men left the ships and headed south in the hope of finding help. But they never did. They were lost in the Arctic wilderness, freezing to death within sight of the ships they'd abandoned. Only 2 bodies were ever recovered, and those only because an Inuit hunter stumbled upon them. The others, including Crozier, were never seen again. So how did the men die? Were they all just lost to the elements after abandoning ship? Not quite. See, After Franklin's death, a sailor named William Brain kept a diary. He recorded everything that happened on the ships, from the dwindling food supplies to the decision to abandon the vessels. And he wrote about how the crew felt as their situation grew more and more desperate. One entry reads, "Our situation is truly deplorable. All our hopes of getting relief by sea are now at an end. Our provisions are nearly exhausted, and we have no means of procuring food unless we can catch a few miserable fish or drive some poor starving dogs from their lairs." Bain's diary tells the story of a harrowing ordeal. A story of men pushed to the limits of endurance by the unforgiving Arctic environment. Baines joined the Royal Navy in 1822 at the age of 14, which means he was just a teenager when he embarked on the doomed Franklin expedition. He was present when Franklin died and assisted in the burial of his body on the ice. When the men eventually abandoned the ships, Baines led the group that stayed behind to guard the ships and destroy any sensitive materials before leaving. He oversaw the destruction of charts, astronomical instruments, and compasses, ensuring that none of this equipment fell into enemy hands. However, he hid his own diary under a stone near the shore. He hoped that someone would find it and tell his tale so that the true story of the expedition could be known. He and the rest of the men lived off the meager rations of pemmican and dog, seal and whale meat that they could hunt and fish until they were too weak to go on. Some of them started to lose their minds. In a delirium, they wandered away from the camp and were never seen again. Others resorted to cannibalism, eating the bodies of their dead shipmates in order to survive. By the time the rescuers found the camp, there were only 3 tents standing and not a single living soul in sight. In the following weeks, the rescuers combed the area for survivors, but they found none. They did, however, discover what was left of the men's final camp. There they found the bones of the men and women who had died there, picked clean by Arctic wildlife. They also discovered the diary of William Baines, which told the full story of the expedition and how the men died. This sad tale of survival and sacrifice is all the more tragic when you consider that a similar fate befell another group of explorers just a few decades later. Roald Amundsen led an expedition to find the Northwest Passage in 1918. His ship, the Joa, was trapped in ice for 3 years. During that time, the crew hunted seals and ate berries to survive. Eventually, the ice released the ship and Amundsen and his crew were able to return home, but not before enduring unimaginable hardships. It seems that the Arctic is a particularly unforgiving mistress, and those who brave her icy waters do so at their own peril. The story of the Franklin expedition and Roald Amundsen's voyage are just 2 of many tales of survival against the odds in the unforgiving Arctic environment. From the earliest explorers who braved the frozen wasteland to modern adventurers pushing the limits of human endurance, these stories continue to captivate us with their tales of bravery, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of exploration. The loss of the Franklin expedition was a devastating blow to the Royal Navy and the British Empire. The Admiralty had hoped that the passage would open up new trade routes to the Pacific, and the discovery of gold in California had fueled speculation that a quick route between the 2 coasts would bring untold riches to Britain. Instead, the expedition had ended in tragedy, and the ships were lost to the ice. The news of the disaster caused a public outcry, and calls for an inquiry were made. An investigation was launched to determine what had gone wrong and whether the deaths could have been prevented. The findings of the inquiry pointed to a combination of factors that had led to the tragedy. Firstly, the ships were found to be ill-equipped for the conditions they had encountered. Although they had been built to withstand the pressure of the ice, they were not designed for the prolonged period of time that they had been trapped. Secondly, the crews had not been given adequate supplies of food and clothing for the journey. While the initial stores had been sufficient for a shorter voyage, They had not been sufficient for the extended period of time that the ships were trapped in the ice. Finally, the leadership of the expedition has also been called into question, with some historians arguing that Franklin had been too slow to realize that the ships were in danger and that he had not taken the necessary steps to ensure the safety of his crew. Despite the tragedy, the legacy of the Franklin expedition lives on. The story of the brave explorers who perished in the Arctic has captured the imagination of people around the world and inspired countless books, films, and works of art. Their sacrifice has also helped to advance our understanding of the Arctic and the importance of proper planning and preparation for polar exploration. Today, the wreck of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror are protected as a historic site, and visitors are welcome to explore the site and learn about the tragic fate of the Franklin expedition. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet so that you won't miss a thing. Leave a comment about what you think happened to the crew. And see you in the next video.